Have you ever wondered what would happen if your whole town turned against you, just for telling the truth? My name is Emily, and I'll never forget the day everything changed. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in our small town, the kind where the air feels heavy and everyone's tempers are just a little bit shorter. I was sitting in the back row of the old town hall, my hands sweating as I clutched a notebook full of questions. The mayor, Mr. Grant, stood at the front, his voice booming as he talked about all the great things happening in our community. But I knew something wasn't right. For weeks, I'd been hearing whispers about money that was supposed to fix the code playground, about promises that never seemed to come true. I'd seen the broken swings and the peeling paint, and I'd watched as my little brother, Jake, and his friends played in the dirt because there was nothing else left. I wanted answers. My heart pounded as I raised my hand, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. "Excuse me, Mayor Grant," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "Can you tell us what happened to the money for the code playground repairs?" For a moment, the room went silent. I could feel my cheeks burning, but I kept my eyes on him, waiting. That's when he laughed, not a small, nervous laugh, but a big, booming one that echoed off the walls. "Emily," he said, shaking his head, "maybe you should leave the grown-up questions to the adults." The crowd chuckled along with him, and I felt like I was shrinking right there in my seat. But inside, something else was happening. I felt a spark, like a tiny fire starting in my chest. I knew I wasn't wrong to ask. I knew someone had to. After the meeting, people avoided my eyes. Some whispered as I walked by, and a few even smirked. I tried to brush it off, but the mayor's laugh kept ringing in my ears. That night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. Why did he laugh? What was he hiding? I thought about the other times I'd seen people try to speak up, how they'd been ignored or worse, made fun of. I wondered if that was why everyone stayed so quiet. Was it really that scary to ask questions in this town? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The more I thought, the more I realized that the mayor's laugh wasn't just about me. It was about keeping everyone silent. And I started to wonder, what would happen if I didn't let it go? The next day at school, things felt different. My best friend, Ava, gave me a worried look as I walked into class. "Are you okay?" she whispered. I nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. Even Jake, who usually teased me about everything, was quiet at breakfast. "Maybe you should just drop it, he said, not meeting my eyes. But I couldn't. Every time I saw the code playground, every time I heard the mayor's laugh in my head, I felt that spark grow a little brighter. I started writing down everything I noticed. Every broken promise, every strange look, every time someone told me to be quiet. I didn't know what I was going to do with it all, but I knew I had to do something. One afternoon, I stayed late after school to talk to Mrs. Thompson, my old English teacher. She always said stories could change the world, and I needed someone to believe in me. I told her what happened at the meeting, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she smiled and said, "Emily, sometimes the people who laugh the loudest are the ones most afraid of the truth." Her words stuck with me. I started to wonder, what was the truth that Mayor Grant was so afraid of? And what would happen if I kept digging? I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment I decided I wouldn't let his laughter silence me. I was going to find out what he was hiding, no matter what it took. But I had no idea just how much trouble that one question would bring, or how far it would take me. What I didn't realize was that this was only the beginning, and the real story was just about to start. After that day in the town hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. The mayor's laugh still echoed in my mind, but Mrs. Thompson's words gave me courage. I kept thinking, what is he so afraid of? That question became my secret fuel. I started paying closer attention to everything around me, conversations in the hallway, whispers at the grocery store, even the way people looked at me when I walked by. It was like I had stepped into a different world, one where everyone was watching, waiting to see what I would do next. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. But then, little by little, the changes became impossible to ignore. My friends at school started acting strange. Ava, who used to text me funny memes every morning, suddenly stopped replying. When I tried to sit with her at lunch, she mumbled something about needing to study and hurried away. I caught a few kids glancing at me and whispering, their eyes darting away when I looked up. It felt like I was invisible and on display at the same time. Even the teachers seemed different, more distant, like they didn't want to get involved. At home, things weren't much better. My mom was quiet, her lips pressed into a thin line whenever I brought up the code playground or the mayor. My dad just shook his head and told me to focus on my schoolwork. But the hardest part was Jake. He used to be my partner in crime, always ready with a joke or a plan. Now, he barely spoke to me. One night, I found him sitting on the porch, staring at his phone. "Jake, what's wrong?" I asked. He didn't look up. "People are saying stuff about you, Em. They're saying you're causing trouble. Maybe you should just let it go." His words stung more than I expected. I wanted to tell him I couldn't let it go, not when I knew something was wrong. But I could see the worry in his eyes, and for a moment, I wondered if maybe he was right. But then the threat started. At first, it was just a note in my locker. "Mind your own business." I tried to laugh it off, but my hands shook as I crumpled it up. Then, someone spray-painted "liar" on our fence. My mom scrubbed it off before the neighbors could see, but I knew she was scared. I started getting strange phone calls at night, just heavy breathing, then a click. Each time, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to tell someone, but who would believe me? It felt like the whole town was against me. The isolation grew heavier every day. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped going to the code playground, even though I missed watching the little kids play. I even stopped writing in my notebook for a while, afraid that someone might find it and use it against me. But the questions wouldn't leave me alone. Every time I tried to forget, I remembered Mrs. Thompson's words. The people who laugh the loudest are the ones most afraid of the truth. What was the truth? Why was everyone so scared? One afternoon, I stayed late at school, hoping to talk to Mrs. Thompson again. When I found her, she was grading papers, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. I told her about the threats, the way people were treating me, and how alone I felt. She listened quietly, then reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Emily, sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone for a while. But you're not really alone. There are people who believe in you, even if they're too scared to say it out loud." Her words gave me a tiny bit of hope, like a candle flickering in the dark. But as I walked home that day, I couldn't help but wonder, how much worse could things get if I kept digging? Was I really ready to find out what the mayor was hiding, even if it meant losing everything? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I couldn't stop now. Something inside me refused to be silenced, no matter how loud the world tried to shout me down. And that's when I realized I needed to find a new way to speak up, one that no one could silence. But how could I do that when it felt like the whole town was against me? The answer was closer than I thought, but I had no idea just how much it would change my life. After that talk with Mrs. Thompson, I walked home with her words echoing in my mind. "You're not really alone. There are people who believe in you, even if they're too scared to say it out loud." I clung to that hope, even as the world around me felt colder and smaller. The threats and whispers didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. I started to wonder if maybe the mayor and his friends would win after all, if maybe I really was just a kid who should keep her mouth shut. But every time I tried to let it go, I'd see the empty code playground, or remember the way the mayor laughed at me, and that spark inside me would flare up again. I knew I couldn't keep fighting the same way. Speaking up in public had only made things harder, and now it felt like every move I made was being watched. But I also knew I couldn't stay silent. That's when I got the idea. What if I could speak up without anyone knowing it was me? What if I could tell the truth in a way that no one could trace back to Emily Parker, the troublemaker everyone wanted to ignore? The idea felt dangerous and exciting all at once, like standing at the edge of a cliff and wondering what would happen if I jumped. That night, I sat at my desk with my old laptop, the one with the cracked screen and the missing e-key. My hands shook as I opened a new browser window and searched how to start an anonymous blog. I read everything I could find, making sure to hide my tracks. I picked a name that meant something to me: The Truth in the Shadows. It felt right, like a secret promise to myself and anyone else who was tired of being ignored. I wrote my first post, telling the story of the Code playground and the missing money, but I left out my name. I wrote about how it felt to be laughed at, to be silenced, and how I knew I wasn't the only one. When I hit publish, my heart raced. I wondered if anyone would ever read it, or if it would just disappear into the endless noise of the internet. The next day, I told Ava about the blog. I was nervous. She hadn't really talked to me since everything started, but I needed someone I could trust. We met behind the gym after school, where no one could overhear us. "Ava, I started something," I whispered, showing her the blog on my phone. She read the post, her eyes wide. This is brave. And kind of risky." I nodded, feeling both scared and proud. "I can't do it alone," I said. "Will you help me?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'm in." For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. With Ava's help, we started gathering more stories. We talked to people who had been hurt by the mayor's decisions, quietly, carefully, always making sure no one saw us. Some people were too scared to say anything, but others whispered their stories, grateful that someone was finally listening. We posted everything on the blog, changing names and details to protect people. Slowly, the blog started to get attention. At first, it was just a few comments, then more. People started sharing their own stories in the comments, and I realized there were more of us than I ever imagined. But as the blog grew, so did my fear. What if someone found out it was me? What if the mayor figured it out? Every time I heard a strange noise outside or got a weird text, my heart would race. I started double-checking every post, every message, making sure we stayed hidden. But the more people read the blog, the more I felt like we were making a difference. For the first time, people were talking about the truth, even if they were still too scared to say it out loud. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything could come crashing down. I wondered how long we could keep our secret, and what would happen if the truth about the truth in the shadows ever got out. I didn't know it yet, but the answer was coming faster than I could imagine, and it would change everything, not just for me, but for everyone in our town. Running the blog with Ava felt like living a double life. By day, I was just Emily Parker, the girl everyone whispered about in the halls, the one who used to ask too many questions. By night, I was the truth in the shadows, sharing stories that made people think, made them wonder, and maybe even made them a little braver. Every time we posted something new, I felt a rush of hope and fear all tangled together. The blog was growing, more comments, more stories, more people quietly reaching out to say, "Me too." It was like we'd started a tiny fire in the darkness, and now it was spreading. But with every new post, the risks grew. Ava and I were careful, using fake names, meeting in secret, never talking about the blog at school or online. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of a car parked outside our house for too long, or I'd get a weird message from an unknown number. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew the truth. The more we spoke up, the more dangerous it became. One Friday afternoon, everything changed. I was in the library, working on a new post about the town's broken promises, when I realized I'd left my notebook, the one with all my blog ideas and secret notes, on the cafeteria table. My heart dropped. I raced back, but it was gone. I searched everywhere, but it was like it had vanished into thin air. Panic bubbled up inside me. What if someone found it? What if they put the pieces together and figured out who I was? That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside made me jump. The next morning, I woke up to a storm of notifications on my phone. My heart pounded as I opened my messages. There it was, a screenshot of my notebook with my name on the cover, posted on a local gossip page. Underneath, someone had written, "Looks like we found our little truth in the shadows." My secret was out. The backlash was instant. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some angry, some mocking, a few even threatening. At school, people stared and whispered even more than before. Someone taped a printout of my blog to my locker, with "Traitor" scrawled across it in red marker. My family was furious. My mom cried, my dad yelled, and Jake just looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Even Ava was scared. And what if they come after us? She whispered, her voice shaking. I didn't have an answer. I felt like I was drowning, pulled under by a wave of anger and fear I couldn't escape. The worst part was the silence from people I thought would stand by me. Mrs. Thompson didn't call. My old friends avoided me in the halls. Even the people who had shared their stories on the blog disappeared, afraid to be connected to me now that everyone knew who I was. I started to wonder if I'd made a huge mistake. Maybe the mayor was right. Maybe I should have just kept quiet. But then, something unexpected happened. In the middle of all the hate, I got an email from someone I didn't know. It was a mom from the next town over. She wrote, "My son was hurt by the same people you wrote about. Your blog gave us hope. Please don't stop." I read her message over and over, letting her words sink in. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of strength. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. That night, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Mrs. Thompson. She wrote, "Emily, the truth is never easy. But you're braver than you know. Don't let their fear become your silence." Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge. I realized that even though I was scared, even though I'd lost so much, I still had my voice. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. I sat on my bed, holding the letter, and thought about everything that had happened. I thought about the mayor's laugh, the threats, the blog, and all the people who had reached out for help. I knew I couldn't go back to being invisible. I had to decide, would I let their anger and fear silence me, or would I stand up and own my story, no matter what it cost? As I stared out my window into the dark, I realized the choice was mine. I could hide, or I could step into the light and show everyone who I really was. My heart pounded as I made my decision. I was done hiding. I was ready to speak, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been silenced. But I had no idea just how much my next move would change everything, not just for me, but for my whole town. What would happen when I finally spoke my truth out loud? I was about to find out. Sitting on my bed with Mrs. Thompson's letter in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. The fear and shame that had been weighing me down for days started to loosen, just a little. I kept thinking about that mom's email, about the people who had found hope in my words. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe my voice mattered, even if it shook. I realized I had a choice. I could let the hate and threats silence me, or I could step forward and own my story. I was tired of hiding. I was tired of being afraid. I wanted to be brave, even if it was scary. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I decided to write a post on the blog, but this time, I wouldn't hide behind a fake name. I would sign it, Emily Parker. I poured my heart into that post. I wrote about the mayor's laugh, the threats, the loneliness, and the hope I'd found in the stories people shared. I wrote about how hard it was to speak up and how much it hurt to be called a traitor. But I also wrote about why I couldn't stay silent, not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been afraid to tell the truth. When I hit publish, my hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I was done hiding. That afternoon, I got a message from the local community center. They were holding a town meeting about the blog and the things I'd written. They wanted me to come and speak. My first reaction was panic. The idea of standing in front of everyone, people who hated me, people who were scared, people who might want to hurt me, made my stomach twist into knots. But then I remembered Mrs. Thompson's words, "Don't let their fear become your silence." I knew I had to go. The night of the meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, trying to calm my nerves. My mom hugged me tight, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, Emily," she whispered. Even Jake, who had been so distant, gave me a small, shaky smile. "You got this, Em," he said. Their support gave me the strength I needed to walk out the door. The community center was packed. People filled every seat, and some stood along the walls. I could see Mayor Grant sitting in the front row, his arms crossed, his face hard. My hands trembled as I walked up to the microphone. For a moment, I thought I might freeze. But then I looked out at the crowd and saw Ava, Mrs. Thompson, and even a few people who had shared their stories on the blog. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Emily Parker," I said, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with every word. I started the truth in the shadows because I was tired of being ignored. I was tired of seeing people get hurt and no one doing anything about it. I know some of you are angry. I know some of you are scared. But I believe that telling the truth is the only way things will ever change. I told them about the missing code playground money, about the threats, about how hard it was to keep going when everyone wanted me to stop. I talked about the people who had reached out, the stories that had been hidden for too long. I said, "I'm not the only one. There are so many of us who want things to be better. We just need to know we're not alone." When I finished, the room was silent. For a moment, I thought no one would say anything. Then slowly, people started to clap. It wasn't everyone, but it was enough. I saw tears in Mrs. Thompson's eyes, and Ava was grinning from ear to ear. Even Jake stood up and clapped, his face shining with pride. I felt a wave of relief and hope wash over me. Maybe things could change. Maybe my voice really did matter. After the meeting, people came up to me, some to thank me, some to apologize for not believing me sooner. A few even shared their own stories, asking if I could help them find their voice too. The next day, my speech was all over social media. People from other towns started reaching out, saying they were inspired to speak up in their own communities. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just a victim. I was a voice. I was a leader. But even as things started to change, I knew the journey wasn't over. There were still people who wanted to silence me. There were still secrets to uncover and wounds to heal. I wondered what would happen next, how I would keep going, and who would stand with me when things got even harder. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't afraid to speak up anymore. And I was ready for whatever came next. After that night at the community center, everything felt different. I could still feel the echo of applause in my chest, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so small. My name, Emily Parker, was out there, and people knew my story. Some people still glared at me in the halls or whispered behind my back, but others smiled, nodded, or even stopped to say thank you. It was like a wall had cracked, and a little bit of light was finally shining through. But just because I'd spoken up didn't mean everything was suddenly easy. There were still days when I felt scared or overwhelmed. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sure I'd hear another angry message or see another cruel post online. But then I'd remember the people who had clapped for me, the ones who had reached out for help, and I'd remind myself that I wasn't alone anymore. I started to realize that healing wasn't something that happened all at once. It was slow, like learning to walk again after you've been hurt. Some days were better than others, but every day I felt a little bit stronger. One of the biggest changes was at home. My family, who had once been so worried and upset, started to come together again. My mom would leave little notes for me on the kitchen table. "Proud of you," or "You're so brave." And my dad, who used to tell me to keep my head down, started asking questions about the blog and the people I was helping. Jake, who had been so distant, became my biggest supporter. He even started helping me with the blog, checking facts and making sure we protected people's identities. It felt like we were a team again, and that made everything a little bit easier. At school, things changed too. Ava and I became closer than ever, and more people started coming to us with their stories. Some were about the mayor and the town, but others were about bullying, unfair teachers, or problems at home. I realized that everyone had something they were afraid to talk about, and sometimes all it took was one person to listen. I started a small group at school called Voices Unheard, where anyone could come and share their story, no matter how big or small. At first, only a few people showed up, but soon the room was full every week. We laughed, cried, and cheered each other on. It was like we were building a new kind of family, one where everyone's voice mattered. The blog kept growing, too. People from other towns and even other states started reaching out, asking for advice or sharing their own stories of speaking up. I was invited to speak at other schools and community centers, and every time I stood in front of a crowd, I felt a little less afraid. I talked about what it meant to be silenced and how hard it was to find your voice again. I told them that healing was possible, even when it felt impossible. I told them that courage wasn't about never being scared, it was about speaking up even when you were. But even as things got better, there were still challenges. Some people still tried to shut me down, spreading rumors or sending mean messages. Sometimes, I'd see Mayor Grant at the grocery store, and he'd just glare at me, like he was daring me to say something else. But I didn't let it stop me. I had learned that my voice was stronger than their fear, and that every time I spoke up, I made it a little bit easier for someone else to do the same. One day, Mrs. Thompson invited me to her classroom after school. She handed me a stack of letters, notes from students and parents who had been inspired by my story. As I read them, I felt tears in my eyes. Some were from people I'd never met, but they all said the same thing. Thank you for helping me find my voice. I realized that my story wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had ever been afraid to speak up. But even as I felt proud of how far I'd come, I knew my journey wasn't over. There were still people who needed help, still stories that needed to be told. I wondered what would happen next, how I could keep making a difference, and what new challenges I might face. I didn't have all the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I was ready to keep going no matter what. And I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if even more people found the courage to speak up, just like I had? Looking back now, it's hard to believe how much has changed. Sometimes, I still catch myself remembering the girl I used to be, the one who sat in the back of the town hall, heart pounding, afraid to speak up. I remember the fear, the loneliness, and the sting of being laughed at by Mayor Grant. But I also remember the spark that started in my chest that day, the one that refused to go out no matter how hard things got. That spark became a fire, and that fire became my voice. Now, when I stand in front of a crowd, whether it's a classroom, a community center, or even just a group of friends, I feel that same spark, but it's different. It's stronger, steadier, and I know it's not just mine anymore. Every time I share my story, I see people's faces change. I see hope, courage, and sometimes even tears. I know that my words are helping others find their own voices, just like Mrs. Thompson and Ava helped me find mine. I've learned that forgiveness is part of healing, too. I don't hate the people who tried to silence me, not even Mayor Grant. I understand now that fear makes people do things they regret. I've let go of the anger, and in its place, I feel something lighter, maybe even gratitude. Because without those hard times, I never would have discovered how strong I could be. If I could talk to anyone who's afraid to speak up, I'd tell them this: your voice matters, even when it shakes. Even when you feel alone, you're not. There are people out there who need to hear your story, who are waiting for someone to go first. I never imagined that being beaten down for speaking up would lead me here, speaking to thousands, helping others find their courage. But I'm glad I never gave up. And as I look forward, I can't help but wonder, how many more voices are out there, just waiting to be heard? Maybe the next story that changes everything will be yours.